I want to thank you all for coming. Today we're having an exciting presentation on some really cool expansion plans proposed by Amtrak. We'll talk a little bit about who we are for those just joining us. And then we'll have the presentation and some time for questions and answers. For a little bit of background on us, we are a 501c3 nonprofit. We strive to be the most knowledgeable independent source of what high-speed rail is, why we should build it, and what steps that folks can take in state capitals and at the federal capital and with private companies to make it happen. And then we give you the tools you need in order to educate your leaders in your state capital and in Washington, D.C. We believe in what we call the integrated network approach, where high-speed lines, new lines built for trains going 220 miles an hour plus or minus, connect major cities. Existing lines are put into public ownership in some cases in order to be focused on passenger rail, either on places like the Chicago to Detroit corridor or the Caltrain corridor in Northern California. And then the majority of route miles are going to be on privately owned railroads with the infrastructure built to allow frequent trains at 80 miles an hour over to create a much broader. And in some cases, the trains will go on each type of track in one journey, and sometimes you'll switch between trains and buses in order to complete your journey. Our goals are a big federal program with everybody getting something different, but something for everybody in at least 49 states, including improving the Alaska Railroad. We have interstate highways in Honolulu or in Hawaii and Puerto Rico. Maybe we have a rail program for them as well, but at least 49 states. We need to be very optimistic. We need to plan for success. We need to both do long-term planning now, get some big transformative projects underway while getting a lot more trains running on the existing network as fast as possible. And we believe that we've got to get to a point where railroads make money at this the same way that highway contractors make money building highways and defense contractors make money building weapons. So that's what we're about. If you like what you see today, if you like the work we're doing, please join us. And our website is hsrail.org. And if you go to the Get Involved and get some swag page, you can get a t-shirt or a hat, etc. I want to introduce Derrick with the Government Affairs Department of Amtrak. We've known each other for a long time. We first met when we were trying to get Amtrak to allow bikes on trains. And I remember the first launch of that, a group of us actually went down and took the train from St. Louis to Herman and rode back to St. Louis. And thank you, Derrick, for making your role in making that trip possible. We've got an exciting program to talk about with Amtrak today. And Derrick, I'll let you take it away.
Good afternoon, everybody. Again, as Rick said, Derrick James, I take care of government affairs for Amtrak in the Midwest. And these have been very exciting times for us at Amtrak. We've been making a bit of news, I think, is probably one of the reasons that that Rick has had such a great uptake with attendance today. So I'd kind of like to talk about where we are at Amtrak right now with regard to our expansion plans and how I think they fit extremely well with the integrated approach that Rick talked about. Just again, a quick 101. I'm assuming that everybody on this call is pretty familiar with us here at Amtrak. We just celebrated our 50th anniversary as a federally chartered corporation operating the nation's passenger train system. Our vision, our charge is to provide an effective intercity mobility, an intercity passenger rail system for the nation that is trip time competitive. And pre-pandemic, we operated over a 21,000 mile route network with about 300 daily trains serving most of the major cities in the United States, although not always well. From the beginning, I think it's instructive to sort of go back to the beginning for just a moment to give us some context on where we are today. What you have right there before you is, as part of Amtrak's founding, the US DOT actually set up the route network for Amtrak. The private sector railroads had run a slightly more extensive network, although it was basically collapsing because of various reasons, competition from other modes, not really attending to the needs of travelers and how those travel markets were changing. So this is the route network that the US DOT set up for Amtrak. It was a slimmed down network of about 16,000 miles with about 150 trains a day. This is the network today. You'll notice that it looks very familiar. During most of Amtrak's existence, much of our effort was just survival and reversing the slide and the decline in the passenger rail network. Noted, though, is that we are still carrying about twice as many folks as we were at the beginning, despite the route network looking very similar. At the beginning, the first full year of Amtrak, we carried 16 million people. In the last pre-pandemic year, we carried more than 32 million customers on this network. And a lot of that growth, though, has come from the type of corridors that we'll talk about here shortly. This map here, many of you may have seen this. Our signature long distance routes are the ones that are highlighted there in yellow. The red corridor over to the right is our Northeast corridor, where we actually run the right of way. It's one of the busiest, that is the busiest electrified, busiest stretch of railroad in the Western Hemisphere. But what's really noteworthy and I think instructive for us going forward is those blue lines. The blue routes are routes that we operate in conjunction with state governments. And usually those are corridors of less than 500 miles or so, where we operate several trains a day, and the states cover some of the capital costs and they cover the operating losses that may be necessary on those services. That's really where the growth has been in passenger rail in the US. About half of our customers every day travel on those segments that are highlighted there in blue. So remember that going forward. So again, looking back to where we were in 1971, the US has changed a lot. The population has increased by well more than a third in the 50 years since Amtrak's existence, and the population of the US is moving. The US at the time of our founding, we had 49 million people living in the northeastern United States, 35 million in the West, and 63 million in the South. We see that the US population has grown, but the population has shifted. The route network that Amtrak covered back in 1971 does not really meet the needs of the United States of today, much less the United States 30 years from now. Here is a map of the nation that some of you may have seen. Despite being a country, broad, covering a broad geographic area, we are concentrating into what we like to refer to as mega regions. Oftentimes we get opposition to investments in passenger rail, say the US is too large, who's going to take a train from Chicago to Los Angeles? Well, we know that the sweet spot for passenger rail is really in those corridors of 100 to 400, 500 miles. And that's where the US and that's where the American public is settling. I'm from Chicago, so I'm familiar with the Great Lakes region. It's the territory which I cover for Amtrak. Looking at Florida, the Gulf Coast, the Texas Triangle, the Piedmont area, and on the West Coast, lots of population movement. Again, the Northeast corridor is still a very critical, high population area, but the US is spreading out to more of these mega regions. This map here superimposes the existing Amtrak network over the mega regions of where the United States is growing and where folks are moving to. I think, again, what's instructive, the darker the line is where there's more robust Amtrak service. The dashed lines are our long distance routes, which are normally just once a day service. We've got significant population centers in the United States that really don't have the quality or the type of Amtrak service that would lend towards people using it on a regular basis. Atlanta, say, for instance, one of the top 10 metro areas in the country, has one long distance train a day that passes through it. Texas, our, I think, second or third most populous state in the United States, only has 3 Amtrak routes, one of which is a corridor service. The other 2 are long distance services, some, again, passing through in the wee hours of the night, not really providing the level of service that we think those taxpayers deserve. Here's a representation of, again, the differences in service that exist across the network. The Northeast Corridor, again, where we actually own the route, 60 million persons living there, a lot more daily frequency, a lot more uptake in Amtrak service. There's a railroad culture that exists in that part of the country because of the level of service that we've been able to provide. So at Amtrak, we think the way to fix this is to provide more service in the population, in the places where Americans live, developing more intra-regional service, connecting the communities within those mega regions, which you saw on the previous map. We need to look at how do we go big, how do we grow Amtrak service so that it serves more of the US population. We all know this. We think investments in passenger rail make a lot of sense. We think that passenger rail investments allows for more sustainable travel. It increases mobility for all sorts of populations, and we think it provides economic value not only to the nation as a whole, but to the communities in which we hope to provide service to. All sorts of sustainability pluses for passenger rail. Passenger rail is way more efficient than other modes, both air and travel by personal automobile. We think that we know that passenger rail trips emit much less emissions into the environment than those other modes. And we see the coming demographics have a preference, and they will change their travel habits to shift to modes that are sustainable if those travel modes are actually there and present for them to use. We think mobility is important. I have a map that I'll show you shortly, which provides a graphic representation of traffic congestion and how the traffic congestion in these mega regions is really, really untenable. And passenger rail has a role, we think, to play in providing people with travel options. The country is urbanizing again, so passenger rail can play a role in providing that. Here again is an estimation in 2045 of where we will see peak travel on the interstate system, where the congestion will be such that travel by car will become more and more unpleasant. So folks will be looking for an alternative mode. And you can see the thickness of the red lines really coincides with those mega regions and where the population is living in 2045. So again, rail can play a role there. We think there's a business case to be made for passenger rail. We think that passenger rail is part of a larger network, again, of possible future high-speed lines, of better transit service, of connection to bike share. Our vision that we're going to put forward will have connections to air travel. This is not about modes competing with one another, but this is about each mode bringing to the table what it does best in providing sort of seamless travel options within regions throughout the country. We think that rail, again, the economic benefits will accrue to not only large cities that are the anchors of the corridors we'd like to provide, but also provide economic benefits to the smaller intermediate communities that have lost out as the air system as airlines have pulled out of smaller markets and as intercity bus carriers have pulled out as well. And as always, I'm glad to say that rail jobs, both the jobs that are directly supported and those ancillary jobs in construction are well-paying jobs. We know that this works. We've seen examples of it. This sort of incremental development that we would like to see in passenger rail. The state of Virginia is a state that we are working with to advance an aggressive expansion that includes growing the base service, which the state of Virginia already had, with several frequencies a day, connecting the Northeast Corridor with Richmond, with the Tidewater region of Newport News and Norfolk, and with Roanoke. We're working with the state to acquire additional capacity on the host railroad network so that we can begin to increase frequencies. And these improvements build upon previous improvements as existing riders travel more, as the service becomes more convenient, as we expand to include service to additional cities, like expansions from Roanoke over to Blacksburg and Christiansburg. The state of Virginia is even looking at a route that crosses the state and doesn't even connect to the Northeast Corridor directly, because they see rail as a way to really transform the state and improve mobility across the state. And that's what we want to do across the country. Part of the reason that we're making news at Amtrak is because we have put forward our proposal to the Congress, and we're airing this in the public, our proposal to reauthorize the Surface Transportation Bill, which expires in the fall, expires at the end of this fiscal year. And part of our reauthorization proposal is to make some changes to that legislation that will allow Amtrak to put forward an aggressive vision of growing corridors. We think that the time to do this is now, that the successes that we at Amtrak have demonstrated in growing our ridership on our existing network, on reducing our operating losses, has given us a level of bipartisan support, which we think would support our vision for growth. We think that the nation coming out of this pandemic is well positioned to make some investments in our infrastructure that would ready the country for the nation of the future, a nation that is addressing its climate needs, a nation that is becoming more urban, a nation that is becoming more diverse. So we are, in our reauthorization proposal, which we submitted to Congress, seeks $59 billion for various things, including the corridor expansion program, including reinvestments in the fleet, including investments in our infrastructure. There's a large backlog of need in the assets that we own at Chicago Union Station, where I am, along the Northeast Corridor, and really to invest in the host railroad network as well, to be able to deliver a level of service that we think the country can support. That reauthorization plan, again, is seeking multi-year funding for passenger rail, reliable funding, so that we can make these investments, so that we can make the long-term investments to grow the system. We think that a passenger rail trust fund makes a lot of sense, so that we can really plan going forward and not make investments on a year-to-year basis. We think that our reauthorization proposal will strengthen our relationship with the federal planners, with the state governments, and again, allow for investments in the system to make passenger rail the preferred mode of transportation in corridors between 100 and 400 miles. We want to seek an update to the Section 209 policy, which governs our relationships with the state. The states are in with us on that, on making changes that will make our accounting more transparent and share the costs in a way that we think are fair. And the backbone of our system is really the long distance network. And so we're seeking improvements to that network as well, including investments in new rolling stock so that that network can continue to service for 50 years going forward. We know that the problem that we've had, again, is that we have not seen the level of federal investments that go to other modes, and our bold vision, we think, starts to begin to correct that. So that vision, again, It's about a corridor development plan that really takes advantage of the sweet spot of passenger rail, those 100 to 500 mile corridors that deliver a low carbon mobility for the nation. Here's the list of the routes that we would like to see added to the Amtrak network over the next 15 years. We would like to add almost 40 new corridor routes and make improvements to 25 existing corridor routes. Take a look there. You will see many of the corridors, or most of these, are within the mega regions that I identified on the previous map. It has been exciting over the past couple of months or so to begin to have conversations with local officials in places like Columbus, Ohio, Crestline, Cincinnati, Duluth, Minnesota, Iowa City. Folks, the response has been almost universally positive. Americans want more passenger trains. 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 Here's a network map that shows not only our existing corridors in black, the yellow lines represent the enhancements to the existing corridors that we have, and the blue lines represent new routes, places that we would like to add to our network. Like I said, in our last pre-pandemic year, we carried more than 32 million customers. We think that in the next 15 years, by the addition of these routes, we will add 20 million more passengers annually to the Amtrak network, making us a more relevant travel mode for consumers all over the country who today do not have rail as a reliable mode for them. So at that, we will certainly we've again presented this to the Congress. We have been having conversations with our state governments and with communities around the country. In order to implement this, we will need your support. We will need you to let your representatives in the Congress know, and to an extent in your state houses as well, know that Amtrak has a bold vision that you think is worthwhile to provide relevant quality passenger rail service to the country. Again, I know I'm speaking with the High Speed Rail Alliance. This is not a purely high-speed rail expansion. This would be an expansion of conventional rail service. There will be segments of the network that will operate at higher speeds. We believe in an incremental development approach, and that by developing this system, it makes development of true high-speed services even more plausible to build upon this network. At that, Rick, I will turn it back over to you. And if there are any questions for folks, I will do my best to try and answer them.
Excellent, thank you. So there are many, many questions and chats. So it is very clear that we're not going to get to them all, but I apologize for that, but we will do our best. I've seen this come up with a couple of times. Louisville to Nashville. So if you look at Milwaukee, Chicago, Indianapolis, Louisville, Nashville, Chattanooga, Atlanta, Savannah, Jacksonville, Orlando, you've got a bunch of small city pairs there that could be connected in really exciting ways. Mm-hmm. How is this network determined, and how did how was it decided whether or not places like those links between Louisville and Nashville would be on there?
Well, over the past couple of years, we have been looking at travel demand, movement of persons between different markets, as well as looking at the existing railroad network, where what we try to do is match reasonable investments that could be made on the railroad network with corridors that have high demand. So the network that you see here represents corridors that we think would perform well, meaning have a high level of ridership. We would be able to implement at reasonable cost improvements in the host railroad network to be able to accommodate a level of frequency that would drive high ridership, and in turn provide us with a level of revenue that would keep the operating support low. So yeah, there are a lot of any of you who know the nation's railroad network know that there's a lot more railroad track out there in the U.S. than we run on with Amtrak, or that we're even providing expansion. But all of those corridors we don't think would deliver the level of ridership and revenue that would keep this a reasonable cost long-term prospect for the nation. Remember, we have to, the way the passenger rail authorization exists, what we're proposing is that we cover the cost initially for the upstart and for any operating support, but then eventually we would need to partner with the states to maintain these routes. So what we want to present to them are corridors that we think would perform well financially and not be a long-term burden on the state in terms of operating support.
So we should be clear, what does Congress need to do to make this map a reality?
Congress needs to either approve President Biden's American Rescue Plan, which in his proposal provides $80 billion to passenger rail, or approve our legislative and grant request, where we lay out and seek the funds necessary to implement this plan. So the president's plan is a little bit more front-loaded. Ours is spread out over time, because it takes time to sort of ramp these routes up. So we want folks to basically contact their congressman and say, Amtrak has a bold plan, please support it. We are certainly having conversations with representatives across the nation. So if they're not familiar, they will be soon.
Continuing in that, it takes a while to ramp up. How much environmental clearance work is going to be needed, and how much of it has been done?
Yeah, again, some of these corridors are already advancing, and that work has been done. Say, for instance, the Twin Cities to Duluth, they've already received a FONSI. Chicago to the Twin Cities, we're in the last months of finishing the environmental clearance work. So different routes are in different phases of planning. This network map, that we've put out, in many instances, it has been a discussion that we have had with states, and so it aligns with the states' rail plans. So some of that work has been done. Others of it will need to get started. So that's why it's really a 15-year plan for us. So I may not have stressed this, but in our reauthorization proposal, in addition to the dollars that we're seeking to implement the Amtrak plan, the Amtrak vision, we also stress, and we also want the existing federal grant programs like RAISE, like the Consolidated Rail Infrastructure and Safety Improvement Program, to be provided dollars so that states can continue to move forward with their own priorities. Again, some states manage their passenger rail programs as a public service. Others want us to manage it for them so that we minimize taxpayer support. For those states that have public service priorities to connect communities to one another, that may not score as well from a financial perspective, we want those states to still have funds available to them so that they can develop those corridors that might not be on their map. And so that's how you maybe deal with or address the needs of, say, a Chicago, Fort Wayne, Columbus, or a Louisville and Nashville that may not be connected on this map. We want those states to have the resources to be able to go ahead and advance those projects too.
So in that same vein, there's two critical infrastructure projects in the center. Union Station,
Mm-hmm.
and the south of the lake reroute, which are kind of related but kind of separate.
Mm-hmm.
How does this proposal deal with the issues around the real need for new tracks in northern Indiana?
To be honest, I wouldn't say the bulk, but a lot of the dollars that we're seeking are really dollars that are going to be invested in the existing freight railroad network to be able to accommodate the additional passenger trains that we'd like to see. So not to zero on any one corridor, but one of the things that we're seeking in the reauthorization is that the Surface Transportation Board be given the tools that it needs, and we can set some timeframes in terms of addressing access for Amtrak to the host railroad network in a timely manner for new services. And that includes resolving issues about how much investment is needed to be able to accommodate passenger trains. So in the case of the south of the lake reroute, that could be addressing capacity needs on the existing freight railroad, or it could be rerouting to another railroad and investing in capacity on that railroad. So again, so a lot of this, some of the specifics are not there yet because this is really kind of a broad vision that we want to get buy-in to. Some of those details are going to have to come later, but know that we have thought about that.
And then can you give us an update on what is happening with the platform and concourse issues at Union Station?
For those of you who are not from the region, Amtrak, the city of Chicago, the RTA have developed a Chicago Union Station master plan, which has looked at future growth and the capacity enhancements that will be needed at Union Station, not only for train side growth, but also for pedestrian flow within the station itself. We are seeking funds within our reauthorization proposal to enact pieces of that master plan. So we are looking to widen platforms, add additional egress, make changes within the passenger concourse to improve passenger flow and safety. So we are seeking those dollars in the master plan. I think the city of Chicago, and may have on our website aspects of the master plan if folks want to take a look at what we're calling for.
Dallas, Houston, Orlando, Tampa, Miami, Las Vegas to Los Angeles. Orlando, Tampa to Miami's Orlando to Miami's under construction. Tampa, they're negotiating. Texas Central is moving forward, we hope. And then it sounds like Las Vegas, Brightline's going to go to construction for Las Vegas. How does this map interact with those services?
Don't we as consumers want to have a robust, competitive passenger rail environment just like we do on the air side? I will say that right now, the only entity that's running passenger trains right now is Amtrak. We are fully in support of development of those additional corridors. We think those services, sometimes there's overlap, sometimes there are synergies. Texas Central, for instance, we've struck a deal with them so that we will handle the ticketing for them. So we've got a line here on the map for Dallas to Houston. Could be them, could be us, but I'll tell you, we'll be selling the tickets for that particular corridor.
Let's get to frequency. So California has demonstrated that as the frequency goes up, the ridership goes up more. What level of frequencies are proposed for these routes, and how is that determined?
The frequencies vary depending on the corridor, and I'll go back to my previous answer that we looked at the travel markets today and what we think could be supported on the existing host railroad network and with the market demand, the travel demand, say along a particular corridor. Now, that's not to say that any particular frequency that we're calling for is the end goal. This is really the beginning. And as we have seen elsewhere, once you provide the service and you begin to build a market for rail, you can start to build up and add additional frequencies. I mean, I was around when San Jose to Sacramento was started with 3 round trips a day. Now what are they at? 18 round trips a day. So again, build it, you provide a high level of service. So you're looking for some examples. I'll stick to the Midwest because that's what I know. Let's say Chicago, let's say Cleveland, Columbus, Cincinnati. I've been spending a lot of time in Ohio. We're looking at starting that up with 3 round trips a day. Detroit, Toledo, Cleveland, new corridor. Again, 3 round trips a day, a pattern where there's a morning, afternoon, and evening departure each way. Chicago, Louisville, Chicago, Indianapolis to Cincinnati, we're looking at 4 round trips a day. Chicago, Carbondale, adding an additional, so you get 4 round trips a day. So it varies. Let's say the Front Range corridor, we're looking at 3 round trips a day there. So again, I'm focused on the Midwest, so that's where I'm more familiar. The Dallas-Fort Worth up to Oklahoma City, we'd like to add an additional frequency there. So there's sort of a memory pattern, so folks have morning and afternoon departures in each direction.
Have you considered getting trains from the Midwest directly into O'Hare Airport?
That is not part of this plan.
Oh, that's a bummer.
Again, again, this is really a vision document. It is not the end game. This is really just the beginning. And if there are local interests in the state or the city of Chicago that see connecting the intercity passenger rail network to O'Hare as a priority, we will work with them. I will tell you that there are other places on the network. Our proposal, we'd like to stop at Cleveland Hopkins Airport. We want to stop at the airport there at Detroit, Detroit Wayne. So we do know, again, that this is about building a transportation system, and where we pass airports, we certainly want to have a station stop.
There's a question here about yard capacity and other kind of capacity in the Chicago area. Is there enough? What can you do to expand it?
We do know that there are yard capacity issues at Chicago, and we are actively working to address it. Because of the nature of how that will be addressed, I would rather not go into any further detail. Excellent. It's a live issue.
Okay, cool. Next question down the line. There is an active organization right now to get additional service in the southern part of North Dakota and Montana. And certainly Chicago to Atlanta and to Florida is a big market. What can folks do to help get those into the discussion?
Back to points I've made before. We know that the sweet spot for passenger rail in terms of its ability to compete in the travel marketplace is on trips of 100 to 500 miles. And of course, that distance gets longer the faster the train goes. We're looking at improving conventional service here. So that's why the 100 to 400 mile limit. Beyond that, the passenger train is less competitive and the services are more expensive to operate. So we would need more operating subsidy to operate long distance trains. I love the long distance trains network just as much as anyone else, but this particular plan is about expanding service that can be competitive and provide revenue and resources to the bottom line of Amtrak. Again, of course, we'll need that capital support, and that's not out of line with what the taxpayers provide to other modes, but we're proposing a system here that will need less long-term operating support. Anything outside of those corridor lengths is not as competitive with other modes, and so that's why we've not proposed it. Again, it doesn't mean that that the states themselves, if they see a public policy role for passenger rail, we think those dollars need to exist and that they need to be able to go after federal dollars to help with that. But that's not part of this proposal for that reason.
So I guess I will re-answer the question saying we need to get the senators of North Dakota and Montana riled up. And that's me saying that. And say, get them money so that train can run.
We'll run it if we're provided with the resources. We will run the train. we will bring our expertise to that. I mean, there's some exciting things coming down the pike on the long distance network in terms of customer amenity improvement. So yeah, bring it on. We'll do it.
Well, what about new rolling stock? The superliners are old, need replaced. What's the status on replacing those?
We are, I think right now we're sort of doing an analysis on the superliner rolling stock. We're doing an analysis on the longevity of the superliner rolling stock. We have asked for the resources in our reauthorization to begin the process of procuring new equipment to replace the superliners. Again, they're getting long in the tooth. So we will do necessary life extension things to keep the equipment safe and comfortable, but we've asked for the money to replace it.
And again, we've got to get people riled up in the Western states to say this needs to happen. So this is folks communicating with their senators and congressmen saying, I want new trains. I don't want these old.
I can tell you this. I'll add this. Throughout the pandemic, ridership has taken quite a significant hit. But we have been very impressed at Amtrak at the uptake by the consumers in our private rooms. We are really going to be in the process, and there's some exciting things about refocusing on the experience for those customers, because people really did respond to the availability of having space for themselves privately to travel, not only just over long distances, but short distances too. So,
well, my 21-year-old has to come back from college in New Orleans. I think there's a high likelihood he's having a private room for that trip back, for that reason.
Thank you for your business.
Was it a VP of long distance trains? I'm not sure his name, but he said that you all were surprised at how that ridership was retained, right? Wasn't it true that the long distance trains did a much better job of retaining the market during the downturn?
They did. Overall, at the nadir, if I'm saying that word right, I mean, we had ridership drop to, well over 90%. Throughout the pandemic, the long distance trains, of course, we're turning around now. They were holding as much as 40% of their ridership. And that just speaks to the essential nature of the transportation that it provides to the communities that it serves. And so we really take that part of our mission seriously as well.
Thank you, everybody, for joining. Again, if we're really in a critical time with the president pushing a really exciting program, I am super excited about Congressman Moulton's proposal and the fact that he constantly points out that there are high-speed trains running between Shanghai and Beijing in 4.5 hours today, and that's the distance of Chicago to Atlanta. And to have a visionary like that today out there pushing this is exciting. This is a great expansion plan that Amtrak has proposed. Of course, we would like Congress to fund something much bigger and more exciting, but we're glad for the initiative.
And thank you so much for your organization's advocacy. We couldn't do what we did without organizations like yours and the public stepping up and voicing your support for rail in the U.S. Thank you.
It's our pleasure. And so I think our members are the ones that make it happen. So thank you again. I'll talk.